What is positional chess? I get this question asked a lot together with how do I get better at positional chess? And in order to understand it better and for me to answer that better, let's break it down in simpler terms. What is positional chess? Technically, it is a strategy in which you develop your pieces on key squares and you try to limit your opponent from doing the same. Both of them happening at the same time, you developing your pieces on the key squares, them developing their pieces on key squares, usually is very rare, right? That almost does not happen. Now, in order to also understand what is other strategy that is the opposite of positional chess, that would be tactical chess. Now, tactical chess is going for the attacks, basically not minding sacrificing pieces for the initiative, for the sharp play, and increasing the heart rate from move 5. All right, that's how I would like to put it. Also, positional games are too boring for those type of players. But once you get to the level where two good players are playing, then there's gotta be element of positional chess, because only tactics simply don't work. All right, now, do you enjoy playing positional games or maybe watching positional games where one side, and I hope often this is you, win the games without opponent making obvious mistakes? Well, I know that I do very much, sometimes even more than winning by crazy sacrifices or sharp attacks. Why is that? I think it is about that satisfying feeling that you created something whole, I would say, like an artist painting a masterpiece. Let's see two games from round 7 of Chess Olympiad 2024 that is going on as we speak in Budapest, Hungary. And both of these games were very relevant for the tournament standings. Let's jump right into it. First game I want to show you was played on the second board of a very important match between Hungary and Lithuania. Both players, and I would say both teams, have been performing very well. With white colors, we have Peter Leko, former World Championship challenger, who played the World Championship match against Vladimir Kramnik, and young man Paulius Pultinevicius. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that again. I am sorry if I do, Paulius. Let's get right to the game. And by the way, this was the decisive game of the match. All the rest of the games were finished in a draw. Peter Leko starts with e4. Paulius responds with c5. We have Sicilian defense on the board. Knight f3, knight to c6, and Peter decides to go for the Rossolimo attack. Rossolimo attack is a sideline that is probably one of the most popular in Sicilian defenses. And idea is to go more on a positional trails and not go for the open Sicilian, which usually offers sharper positions. Black responds with e6. g6 would be another main move, but e6 is one of the main one, and bishop captures c6 immediately before knight g comes to e7, helping the knight on c6. b takes c6. In these positions, black usually get the problem of the light squared bishop, because no matter what they do, that light squared bishop will be problem to get out. White immediately plays b3. Now, we could say that this is not a novelty, but this is not a very common continuation either. White wants to fianchetto bishop on the long diagonal, and they do so. And once black plays d6, preparing e5, and as we said, black now wants to get the light squared bishop out. White says nope. e5, that bishop cannot get out that easily. And e5 in Rossolimo attack positions is a very common idea. Now, black doesn't want to ruin their pawn structure, because if they took, then they would be left with the double pawns on the c file. So they decide to maintain their pawn structure intact. Well, it is not quite intact since black has double pawns here, but I mean connected. White plays d3, queen to b6, and we could say that we are already in a relatively new position. Now, idea of queen b6 is to play c4, and that bishop would be hanging on b2. So for that reason, Peter plays knight to c3. Now, c4 would not be a possibility right now because let's say d takes c4, d takes c4, and this knight would come to e4 with a lot of firepower, and then probably like bishop d4 is also a threat, which puts black in a very difficult situation immediately. So I think we could say that queen to b6 was already inaccuracy from black. Knight to g6 was played, short castle, and Paulius insists on carrying c4. Well, Peter says, I am happy with that move. Knight to a4, queen to c7, and Peter pushes d4. d takes c4 would also be quite good, I would say. Let's say if bishop a6 here trying to pin it, rook e1, dc, and even this position I think is favorable for white. Peter likes going, let's say, h4, but Peter had different idea here. d4. Let's play purely on positional trails. Bishop goes to a6, trying to create the threat here, but of course rook is going to be moved away to e1, and black plays c5. Another inaccuracy as we see here. Now, I can hardly call that a blunder, or I would even say a mistake, because black wants to correct their pawn structure. What is wrong with it? Well, what is wrong with it is after knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, d takes c5, queen takes c5, we are left with a position where dark squared bishop now will become a very powerful piece, and it starts with a4. What does a4 do? It stops black from going castle, because if you do castle, then bishop a3, and suddenly queen and the rook are skewered. So black decided to sacrifice the pawn. Leave me alone, let me castle. But Peter says, nope, bishop a3, and I will capture your pawn after you move your queen, and I make sure that my bishop is dominating this diagonal, and at the same time it can come to a very powerful d6 square. Queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, and just like that, white is up a pawn. And that is not the only problem for black here. Another big problem is that this bishop is a useless piece. What does that bishop do? Absolutely nothing. C takes b3, knight takes b3, a very nice touch, by the way. And after long castle, Peter plants that immovable bishop on d6. Black plays f6 to dislodge or try to dislodge the bishop, but knight goes to c5, attacking the bishop, and after f takes e5, simply rook e to d1. And let's see what is happening. White simply defends the bishop on d6, attacks the bishop on a6, and if bishop moves away either c4 or let's say b7 or even e2, white will simply play rook a to b1, threatening the checkmate. He cannot escape anywhere else. The only way to keep the game going and not get checkmated immediately would be giving up the rook. So after rook e to d1, Paulius resigned. What a miniature, positional miniature, I would say, by Peter Leko, where Paulius didn't even understand where things went wrong, probably. That was the first game that I wanted to show you. I actually enjoyed going over this game. Now, the second game that I wanted to show you was also very important in terms of the tournament standings. This is the first board between Armenia and England. Okay, Haik Martirosyan, who's been 2700 before, and Nikita Vitiugov, who has also been 2700 for a very long time. He's been actually more, 2730 probably, for a very long periods of time. So let's see. Haik starts with d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight f3, and we have Queen's Indian position on the board, but Nikita wanted to transpose into d5 and Queen's Gambit declined. Now knight goes to c3. We have the main line of Queen's Gambit declined so far, but again it changes one more time. Nikita accepts the gambit here, so we are now in the Queen's Gambit accepted territory. White plays e3 to recapture that pawn back on the next move. a6, a very standard idea here, trying to meet bishop c4 with b5 and kicking the bishop away. But Haik did not want to allow b5. That is also a theoretical line, but a4 is also very common, not allowing b5 with the tempo kicking the bishop away. So instead, black tries to gain the space on the queen side with c5 and put the pressure on the white center. Bishop takes c4, knight goes to c6, short castle, bishop to e7. Standard development so far, and here Haik decides to go for the trade. D takes c5. This is usually a good idea when bishop has already made one move, so black will have to waste one more tempo capturing that pawn back. So queen takes d1. Before black recaptures the pawn on c5, they decide to trade queens. Rook takes d1, bishop takes c5. Now, when I was getting started with chess and I would look at these positions, I would think that, oh man, this is so boring. Completely symmetrical position. Black has no weaknesses. Why would white choose to go for this? Why wouldn't they play something more aggressive, let's say, especially by their own choice, because d takes c5 was not a requirement, right? White could have kept playing without trading d for the c pawn. Well, things are not as easy as it looks at the first glance. Now, difference between minor pieces of white and minor pieces of black will be enormous. We'll see what I mean by that. Knight goes to d2. So the knight on the king side was not doing much, so now it is redirected to a more useful square, which would be b3. But Nikita takes the prophylactic measure against it, moves the bishop before knight lands on b3, so plays bishop to b4, and now Haik decides to reroute that knight to c4 and freeing the c4 square for the knight. Now bishop also was not doing much there, so it retreats to a little more useful square where it could go to the long diagonal from f3. Now if knight comes to c4, then it will be headed to b6 or d6, both very useful squares for white. So again, black says that I do not want to allow knight c4, so place knight to a5 to counter this knight coming from to c4. Rook to b1. This, I think, is probably a move that personally for me would be most difficult to find. And as you can see, Haik also spent 7 minutes on this move. And it is the first suggestion of the computer. What is the idea of rook to b1? White wants to kick this bishop away with knight a2, and if they had done that immediately, then there would be bishop takes d2, knight to b3, and too many pieces get traded here after knight takes rook d2, and that would now make black's defensive task much easier. I don't think actually they are even defending anymore, because bishop d7 comes with a tempo attacking the a4 pawn, then king to e7, and rook d8, rook c8. Black is at least not worse, if not slightly better. So that is what rook b1 does. Okay, prophylaxis. Bishop goes to d7, and now knight a2, kicking this bishop away. Now, first inaccuracy of the game, bishop retreats back to e7. Computer likes taking on d2 more, but after bishop d2, black doesn't have time to capture this pawn because the knight is hanging on a5. Knight b3, probably bishop to b4, stopping black from castling. If now black takes on a4, knight to c3, bishop retreats back, bishop c4, and suddenly the knight is in trouble. Okay, line continues here with a5, but then there are other moves like bishop a3 here, if a4, knight b5, and funny enough, Black may even get mated here. King has nowhere to escape. Obviously, bishop b5 is not forced, but if not, then knight c7, knight d6 are both threats with basically crushing attack. So Nikita didn't want to have any of that, moves the bishop back to e7, but now white gets the queenside expansion going with b4. Knight will have to retreat back to c6, and knight now lands on c4 as desired few moves ago. Black plays knight to d5, which looks like a very natural move here to put the pressure on white's queenside. And potentially, if knight moves away, well, where else would that knight move actually? But like pointing towards the c3 square, I was gonna say. But I think knight d5 is inaccuracy because of e4. And now if knight takes b4, knight takes b4, knight takes b4, knight will go to b6, forking rook and the bishop. If rook goes to d8, bishop a3. If you thought that initiative cannot be developed without queens on the board, think again. Bishop a3, knight goes to a2, takes on e7, then takes everything on d7, and the resulting endgame is basically much better for white because both these pawns are hanging, probably taking on a6 first, and then returning bishop to b5, and then trying to go for those kingside pawns. So Nikita, after some thought here, actually that was a long thought, almost more than 25 minutes of thought, he decides, all right, I made a mistake, I'm gonna return back to f6, but now all white pieces start flowing here. Knight goes to b6, attacking both. Rook has to come to d8, b5, kicking the knight away, ab, knight comes to e5, and now knight returns back to c3. The knight did its job on a2, it is time to bring back into the game. Bishop to c8, trying to get some breathing air, try to trade at least one piece here. But bishop goes to f4, white says, we're gonna trade on my terms. Because now he cannot take, rook takes d1, and both the knight and bishop will be hanging. Knight retreats to g6, bishop c7, that's what I meant by trading with white on white's turn. Rook d1, short castle. Is it over? Well, e5, nope, black troubles are not over. Knight will have to go to d5 because if it goes to e8, a very aesthetically pleasing move here, bishop to b8, and this bishop on c8 is lost. Black is suffocating on the 8th and 7th rank. So knight d5 was pretty much forced. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes c8, rook takes c8, b6. Material is technically still equal on the board, but black is completely lost here. Actually, that would probably be even more relevant comment on here. Material at the moment is equal, but black could probably resign already. Position is resignable because knight cannot move, bishop cannot move, rook cannot move, knight can move, but it's not doing anything. And what else is one bishop supposed to do? So let's get back to the game here. Knight takes c8, rook takes c8. Now b6, another very powerful move. On top of everything, now white also gets the passer here. For example, bishop a6 and then b7, b8 would be a threat. Bishop goes to c5. Now, if bishop a6, there's bishop takes b6 tactic. So obviously not that. White plays another very nice move here. Just simply g3. There are a lot of winning moves here, but why not give king some breathing air here. Bishop g4 now will be a threat. Also g3 covers the f4 square. Why not? Knight to e7. Well, also taking on d5 immediately was not possible because of knight f4. So technically g3 has a threat of capturing this pawn on d5. Knight retreats back to e7, and now white brings the bishop on f3, putting the pressure on this d5 pawn. Black tries to bring king into the game. Well, now bishop takes d5 would obviously be in white's advantage, simply winning the pawn, but Haik thought that that is not enough. Rook goes to a1. Let's go for the complete domination. f5, rook goes to a5 first, kicking the bishop away. Bishop to d4. Well, now actually white is happy to capture on d5 because it's gonna happen with the tempo, and if you move the bishop away somewhere, then rook, well, here actually rook c5 will win some material. Let's say bishop to b2. Here I believe rook to d7 would be the case, and then e6 dominating the 7th rank, threatening bishop d6, taking that pawn on b7 again. So again, this would be a game over. Bishop goes to c3 to attack the rook to c5, bishop b4, and a very nice final touch here, rook to c4. When one side has that much of a positional advantage, it usually hints to tactics also showing up, right? And that is the case here. The point is bishop is hanging. If knight takes d5, simply bishop to d6, bishop takes d6, rook c8 with the check, and king e7, then capturing back on d6. Now white is up in exchange. They will simply go and take all the pawns. Well, f5 pawn is probably not even necessary. G and h pawn on the king side, and then we'll simply march these pawns down. So after rook c4, Nikita decided to resign. All right, those were the two games that I wanted to show you, where both, actually in both games, both players were very strong players, have been showing some really fun chess at this Olympiad. Actually, I can't say that against Nikita. I think he's, let's see his tournament. He's been having a solid tournament, but with this loss today, he is 3 out of 6, so basically 50%. But I would say winning a game like this is a very satisfying feeling. You outplay your opponent without them making mistakes, which speaks that, especially if you do outplay a strong player like that, you feel like you understand chess. All right, I hope you do get feelings similar to this in your games sometime soon. And if you do, if you have any games like that, I would love to see them. Do let me know, share them with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.